on his way. Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way.
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
We say fuck a lot. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Mountain Murders. I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
How are you, Dylan?
I'm doing great.
You are?
Yeah, if I was any better, they'd write a song about me.
That's an exaggeration.
It's not true. No, I feel really good at the moment. You know what I'm saying?
Working that like 2 weeks straight.
Yeah, 2 week, 12-hour shifts every day with a couple of 18s to flip yourself from nights to days, then back from nights to days, from days to night. Who knows what's going on anymore? But here we are, and I feel refreshed at the moment. Just had a great meal with my lovely wife.
Dylan prepared us a delicious meal. Thank you, Dylan.
It was full of succulent meats, right?
Juices.
Yeah. And feel fortunate to actually be able to put meat on the table at the moment with the current inflation.
Good grief.
Oh, my God.
Okay, you came home from the grocery store, and you were like in awe of the pricing.
Yeah.
A1 steak sauce.
The tiny bottle is nearly $4.
You said the larger bottle is like 7 something.
It's above 7.
The other day when I did some grocery shopping, I was blown away in the cereal aisle when a box of Cheerios, just Honey Nut Cheerios, nothing fancy, right? It's your grandma's cereal. Almost $8 a box. It was like $7.58 for the small box. That wasn't like the family size.
Shut up.
That was like the regular size box of Cheerios was over $7.
Now,
And I'm like, who in their right mind is paying $10 nearly for a box of cereal?
no matter what cereal it is, from the most sugary to the healthiest, it's basically empty calories.
It's just not, it's
Right?
like not even really healthy for you.
And when you told me that, I assumed it was the family size box.
It's not.
It's crazy. And it's everywhere, and everybody knows it. I mean, today we had a nice little steak and a little salad kit or whatever for dinner. And the steak was more reasonably priced than any of the rest of the foods I bought. That's
Probably
scary.
because they have to reduce the price of steak so people buy it.
So, anywho, we know everyone out there is struggling, but we are glad to be here to take your mind off of it. So let's quit talking about inflation.
Gosh, is it ever going to be deflated?
Well, according to
Like Tom Brady's balls? Come on.
according to the government at the moment, it's not as bad as it seems.
It's not?
I don't know what they're looking at.
Okay.
Impending doom on all fronts. But yeah, let's go.
All right. Yeah, I'm kind of ready for the meteor to hit Earth.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be my luck. I'd be far enough
Impact style.
away to survive the impact and then have to deal with the fallout.
Speaking of money, Dylan, money-making schemes, we have an excellent case for you today.
Yes, this is very interesting.
And how does that relate to money-making schemes? Well, you're about to find out. Dylan, are you ready? We are still in Alabama.
Okay.
Heading out of Alabama and into beautiful West Virginia for the month of July.
I can't wait to get into West Virginia.
Oh, man, we've got a banger of a case coming.
Ooh.
It's one of those cases we swore we would never do, but we're going to do it.
Yeah, okay.
We just can't help ourselves.
I'm not going to spoil it,
No,
but yeah.
we'll let people guess.
I can't wait.
Okay, ready for today's case, Dylan? I'm excited about this. Learned about this guy, did my deep dive research, and was like, this is so fascinating. How is this not like a more known case? How is this guy not as big as Jesse James?
You constantly find these types of stories.
All our folks down in Alabama probably know who I'm talking about. Reuben Houston Burrow was born December 11th, probably around 1856, on his parents' farm in Lamar County near the town of Sulligent. Some sources list his birth as 1854, but his tombstone says 1856. So got about a 2-year window there. Could have been born in 1854, could have been 1856.
I don't think that was at all uncommon during this time period to not know exactly the day you were born, considering records, birth certificates might not have been kept at all.
Probably not available. Burrow was one of 10 children born to Alan and Mary Caroline. In their area, his mother was known as a witch, a faith healer, and her nickname was Dame Burrow.
These people always have the best names.
His mother was superstitious, and Rube grew up with casual items around the house like eye of newt, toe of frog, and wool of bat.
Now, do you think that back then, oftentimes, people that were considered witches were just healers, natural healers?
Well, they were probably practicing some form of folk magic, carried over from the old days in Europe.
Okay, so you could go to them to help a sniffle and get a curse removed.
Possibly.
Okay.
So his mother was also a midwife who kept a bountiful table and was very accommodating to guests. Allen was born in Maury County, Tennessee, around 1825. His parents had migrated to Franklin County, Alabama, when he was only a year old, and they settled in Lamar County in 1828, which is a mountainous region with oak and pine forests. It was a poor county at the time with mostly small farmers. In the late 19th century, lumber mills would dot the area. It was in 1849 that Allen married his wife. The pair bought the small farm. And now Allen possessed very little formal education, but was known as a hard worker. Reuben's father, Allen, was also a bootlegger, Dylan. He was an illegal moonshiner, a former Confederate veteran. He began moonshining to pay the taxes on his property post-Civil War.
Common move.
Yeah. In 1876, Allen Burrow was indicted for illicit distilling and left the county for 2 years to avoid arrest. He ended up making a compromise with the federal government and was able to return home to Alabama. So to say Reuben, but folks call him Rube, grew up with a loose interpretation of the law is reasonable. His younger brother Jim was born around 1858, making the pair close in age. Growing up, they were inseparable. At a young age, they became enthralled with tales of the outlaw Jesse James and his gang. Yet most depictions of his boyhood show that Rube led a very average life for a country boy of that time. He was known as a swift athlete, a great swimmer, an ardent hunter, and a natural woodsman. He possessed a fearless spirit and was considered a humorous young man. His bit of formal education allowed Rube and his brother to enjoy reading the pulp dime novels, and that's kind of how they became borderline obsessed with Jesse James.
Well, the pulp dime novels made heroes out of a lot of these criminals and outlaws, right?
When he was only 15 years old, Rube robbed a neighbor at gunpoint. Though he was wearing a crudely made mask, his father figured out what he had done and forced him to return the money, apparently also giving his son a whipping. A New Orleans newspaper would later report that when he was only 19, Rube killed another boy in Alabama during an argument on a hunting trip, but was not prosecuted. Another report described him as a young bandit organizing a group of boys to make illegal whiskey, and that he tried to counterfeit but was unsuccessful around the same time. So if those stories are true, he's murdered someone as a teenager and has tried to become a moonshiner as well as counterfeit money.
This is some pretty serious stuff this young man's into, right?
Of course, those are merely rumors, sensational news reports that are picked up kind of after the fact. Hard to verify if any of that is true.
Yeah. Who knows if it's truth or if it's just their legend being, made bigger and bigger.
Allen would say his son Rube was a, quote, good boy and a hard worker. He said, and I quote, "He plowed and split rails and gave me as little trouble as any boy I ever raised. He never disobeyed a command in his life. He went to school at times. We've always been poor people, and I couldn't send him all the time, but he learned how to read and write and was tolerable at figures."
So he didn't give him a whole lot of trouble. And as far as in his dad's eyes, but like you said, I think the family in general, or the people around him, his friends as well, had this loose interpretation of the law and stuff like that. But it's interesting. It seems like his dad had a moral compass as well by making his son return, to the neighbor if he stole from the neighbor. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I found that interesting.
In 1872, around the time his father was facing those legal troubles with the moonshining, Rube left the family farm and went to Stevensville, Texas, where his uncle Joel Burrow owned a cattle ranch. At the time, the lure of frontier life and cowboy stories sent many a young man to Texas. They would leave the family behind with a designation called GTT, Gone to Texas. Now, Dylan, you've done some research about this period of time, the Wild West, the frontier. Give us a rundown.
Yeah, basically, excuse me. It seems like this period, a lot of people assume it was quite a bit longer than you may realize, like maybe a century of this, lawlessness pushing into this frontier. But it was actually about 30 years after the Civil War, the period of the Wild West. And at the end of that 30 years, much of the Wild West had been settled and was starting to calm down. So there was no official law, which would oftentimes give rise to vigilante justice. Now, the only people who tried to maintain some kind of order in these smaller towns were, obviously constables, sheriffs, marshals, detectives. And sometimes they even had to actually send the military in to a region to kind of chill it out or run off the bandits and criminals.
Well, yeah, because at this time it's territories.
Right.
Most of the western states, as we know it today, were territories.
Yeah, they weren't
Like
incorporated.
the New Mexico territory, Arizona, like you didn't really have states. It was just sort of open and lots of lawlessness.
Yeah, and you would have these boom towns, which was really turned on high, ramped up a whole lot after the 1848 gold rush.
Yeah, I was going to say the 1840s when the gold rush
yeah,
happened. Yeah,
mass migration of people from all over the country and even other countries coming here to go to try to strike it rich and, find their little gold mine that they could mine. And I found this interesting. The Code of the West. You ever heard that? It is live each day with courage, take pride in your work, always finish what you start, and do what has to be done.
I like the Code of the West.
I live by this code, and I didn't even know it.
You're a cowboy.
I'm a cowboy at heart.
Without a steel horse to ride.
And
But I can make you a little horse out of the broom.
Another little tidbit I came across, the most famous gunslinger. Now, I think this is a name a lot of people have never heard. I hadn't heard it. John Wesley Hardin, officially or unofficially, but was said to have killed 42 people.
I've heard that name before.
He's pretty handy with the steel, right?
If you know what I mean.
If you know.
See a regulator.
God, I love that movie. We should watch that when we get done with this.
Young
Every time I talk about the
Guns.
Wild West, I think about the first Young Guns.
It's pretty good. And I have to say, Lou Diamond Phillips, he did it for me in that movie.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah, he's pretty sexy.
he's hot.
Yeah.
Is that all you have for us?
Well, I have some more history tidbits, and I know people's like, oh, God, when Dylan does research, it's like garbled garbage, and we don't understand what the hell he's talking about. I got some more tidbits
That's why
for
they
later.
listen.
Some more tidbits for later. So, yeah,
Tune
basically,
in for Dylan's brand new podcast, Garbled Garbage History.
I'm going to call it Just Because.
It's incoherent.
It's
but,
incoherent.
you may get a lesson out of it. You never know.
Or a couple of chuckles. So, basically, you got this whole entire region of the country. It's unknown to a lot of people. That's when you get the famous wagon trains, taking whole families and whole communities sometimes.
I know, sir. I play the Oregon Trail.
Yeah. So, and very dangerous because people always die on your game. Yeah,
Dysentery.
so you get these boom towns, and at that time, it didn't take a lot to constitute a town. You have ramshackle infrastructure. You don't have to build sewage and all that. You literally dig a well in the middle of town. And, then up pops, you got your saloon, your general store, a couple of other businesses, and boom, you got a community all of a sudden.
You're going to have a saloon.
Yeah, no
Tavern.
local government, really. Oftentimes, even if there was a lawman there,
A blacksmith.
if they brought in a petty criminal or a serious criminal, there's no judge, there's no trial, there's no court set up. They would have to oftentimes take them at least to the nearest big town, which was miles and miles and miles away, not easy to get to. And that's obviously what gave rise to the whole concept of frontier justice, which is much like mountain justice.
We have that here in Appalachia.
Vigilantes, the community itself, holding people accountable and acting as judge, jury, and executioner.
Sometimes I wonder if we'd be better off with some good old-fashioned mountain justice.
Man, I did see a guy today. I can't remember all the details as usual, but basically he used the sex offender registry list in Alaska to hunt sex offenders.
Oh, yes.
And break into their homes, steal from them, and beat the living shit out of them.
Yes.
And
I don't know the guy's name, but I think there's like a new documentary or docuseries about him.
Yup.
Perhaps.
All I can say, if they're really sex offenders, not all heroes wear capes.
Okay, so let's get back to the story. Within 3 years, Rube had met and married the daughter of a prominent cattle rancher, Virginia Alvison. This secured Rube's future as a farmer. He and Virginia had 2 children together. By all accounts, they were living the frontier life, working hard, raising a family. In 1877, a son, William Thomas, was born, and in 1880, a son named Allen. Though records didn't continue for Allen, so it is assumed he died in infancy. A daughter was born in 1881 named Mary Florence. It has been stated that Mary Florence was a very rough birth for Virginia, and she never quite recovered from the birth of her daughter.
Well, I mean, just birthing any child during this period, very dangerous, right?
Yeah, she had a lot of issues after. Like I said, always in poor health after the birth of her daughter, never quite recovered. By 1876, Jim had joined his brother Rube in Texas. And now, if you remember growing up, they were like besties, right? Super close brothers. And together the pair worked as cowboys. Things seemed to change in 1880 when Virginia became ill during the pregnancy, as I mentioned. She eventually died of yellow fever. Feeling ill-prepared to raise children on his own, Rube took them back to Alabama, where his parents agreed to look after them on the farm. He went back to Texas to resume his life as a farmer and a cowhand. According to the Pinkertons Detective Agency, which will come into play later, Rube was a member of the Masonic Order and at some point worked for the Mexican Central Railroad during this time. A tale that has been handed down about the Burrow brothers, and I thought this was a funny little anecdote that I wanted to include in the story.
Lay it on me.
So there was a watering hole about 5 miles north of the town of Alexander, Texas, that had been homesteaded by a man named Charlie Papworth since 1860. He lived there with his wife Jenny and their 2 children. Supposedly, while Charlie was gone on a trip, Jenny and one of the children disappeared and were suspected of being murdered by a neighbor named Brownlow, who allegedly dumped their bodies in a well. Brownlow, worried about Papworth's revenge, led a group of vigilantes to lynch the man he declared as a cattle thief. So trying to, take the attention off of himself by calling Papworth a cattle thief.
Oh, so
even though he's murdered Papworth's wife and child.
Oh, wow. So he's trying to get out ahead of it and say he's lying. None of that's true, basically. And he's a cattle rustler or a horse thief back then was about the worst thing you could be.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's people's livelihood. I mean, it meant
you're a degenerate.
It meant everything to your homestead. If you lose your horse, or that's your transportation, that's your workhorse.
Yeah, if you remember, the story of the Hatfields and McCoys all began over a pig theft.
Yeah.
An alleged pig theft.
Well, don't mess with my bacon.
Right? Okay, so Papworth fled, but his house was empty and said to be haunted by Jenny and her baby. During an outing at a local saloon, the Burrows heard this tale of murder and were fascinated by it. They made a bet with the bartender for $200 that they could stay the night in the house for 3 days, or that they could stay, in the house for 3 days and 3 nights.
Okay.
We're going to take this bet.
So we're not afraid of the haunted house, basically.
It has been told that the brothers did see the ghostly mother and child on the first night, but remained in the house. The second night, however, the ghosts floated through the walls of the home. And that is when the Burrows exited the house, exhausted their pistols shooting at the ghosts, and ran into the darkness.
And had to pay $200 to the bartender.
Yes. And
Well, that's
that
a
is
big bet.
Story that has been passed down multiple generations through the Burrows family about the brothers.
Wow, that bet was literally thousands of dollars in this day and
Right?
age. Yeah.
In 1880, Jim returned to Alabama with his father to Lamar County and ended up moving in with one of their sisters and was helping on the family farm. That's when he married a local girl named Martha Elizabeth Hankins, who was 16 at the time. And by 1885, the couple had 2 children of their own. In 1884, Jim bought 442 acres in Alabama to establish his own farm. But he abandoned the idea and moved back to Erath County in Texas at the urging of his brother Rube. In 1884, Rube married another woman, Adeline Hoover. They moved to Alexander, Texas, hoping to get this fresh start at farming. And Alexander is in Erath County, by the way. By now, Rube had earned quite a reputation as this athletic man, an excellent rider, and a marksman among the cowboys. He was leading a band of cowboys which included future outlaw cohorts Henderson Bromley and Nep Thornton. I believe Nep Thornton is his brother-in-law. Or married to Adeline's sister. Somehow he's like a
okay,
brother
married into
and-
the family.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Now, his farm in Alexander began failing immediately, almost, Dylan. There were poor crops, and his marriage was also not working out as well as the first one. He and Adeline did not get along, and it was not a happy union.
Well, I'm going to assume he had issues with his soil.
A lot of problems with the soil, Dylan.
Well, finances, when your finances are going south, that never typically helps a relationship out, let alone if you
He's
have
just out there trying to sow his seeds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, all he's got is a mud clot farmer.
He's got a hoe,
Okay,
probably.
yeah, I'm sure he does.
Maybe like a plow. I don't really know anything about farming.
He has equipment, even if it was fairly rudimentary. I don't know if that's the right word, equipment. But I found it interesting. Isn't Rube something they came to call kind of like a backwards, maybe hillbilly type of country person?
I mean, I've heard that
I don't know if
phrase
it's
used before, yes.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it came from him or anything like that.
It's short for someone named Rube or Reuben, and can also be considered a country bumpkin or an inexperienced, unsophisticated person.
Nice.
I just remember in Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter calls Clarice a Rube.
Of course he would.
Yeah.
He's so sophisticated.
Okay, so crops in the shitter, marriage in the shitter. Things aren't going well for Rube.
So his farm and his homestead and his relationship are going south.
Yeah.
Okay.
In 1888, Jim reportedly had a brush with the law in Fort Worth when he stabbed a man in the northwestern corner of the county. However, Jim took leg bail, is what they called it, and disappeared from the courthouse. So I guess leg bail is like when you would pay and you were allowed to leave. Like you could walk out on your own 2 legs, but you were supposed to come back.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but that kind of seemed to be what leg bail was.
I was like, did he leave one of his legs as collateral?
Yes, he did. And then he just disappeared from the courthouse.
He was last seen limping away to the west.
He and Jim, who were known as the Burrow brothers, decided to switch career paths. So they'd already earned a reputation in the area as like these, amazing cowboys, fast, quick with a gun, could get the horses, do all the things they needed to do. And this is when they decided to switch career paths. So it seemed like Jim had already gotten himself into a little bit of trouble before this time. Again, stabbed a man.
So both these brothers are going to be handy with the guns.
Yep.
They're going to be able to ride like nobody's business.
Yep.
A horse, and probably
And
proficient.
probably a couple of ladies too.
Well, yeah, I'm sure.
Okay.
For like a shilling or something. All of a sudden, we're in the United
A
Kingdom.
soiled dove.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. I want a rinsed dove, okay? And also probably with the ropes and such, just everything that all the skills that come with being a ranch hand.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker!
Strong as hell,
Yeah.
he's already naturally athletic, so
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to quit describing these guys.
Please stop.
They're wearing a bunch of, there's leather everywhere and sweat and like Stetsons, right? Was that even a hat then? Why do I even know what a cowboy hat's called?
They did have hats, but I don't necessarily think Stetson was a brand yet. Right?
I see.
Now you've got me thinking they're wearing like Stetson cologne.
They're wearing like $1,000 Stetson hat. Interesting.
No. Seemingly inspired by a Texas train robber, Sam Bass, the Burrow brothers decided to form their own motley crew of outlaws along with Thornton and Bromley. The fantasies of quick riches through criminal means appealed to the men over the harsh realities of a hardscrabble rancher life. The gang first decided to head into Indian Territory, now known as Oklahoma, but they had little success in securing that bag. The plan was to rob a native woman who allegedly held extreme wealth, but a newspaper claimed that she was able to fight these robbers off vigorously.
Oh my gosh, she was a badass.
She was a badass. Good for her.
Good for her.
So their money was jingling and not folding, Dylan.
Oh, so their money was jiggle, not folding.
Yeah.
Oh, that was horrible.
Yeah, not folding, not folding.
So, that's great. So now they have this great idea that we're going to become outlaws. We're going to do this cool thing that people are doing now to make these big scores.
Yes.
Okay.
After this botched robbery attempt, the four rode back to Texas in December. They hatched a new plan. The gang decided their best option was to rob trains.
So they couldn't take the elderly native woman. So now let's go rob a moving train.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
You had a little info about the first train robbers. Do you want to like give us a history lesson real quick? Because I thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, the way my brain works, at first I'm just like, who came up with this idea? I was like, there's had to have been the first person, right? So apparently on October 6, 1866, John and Simeon Reno staged the first train robbery in American history. Now, before this, there had been train cars looted and robbed in all kinds of various ways, but those were always stationary, either a stop at a depot or in some train yard somewhere. You sneak in at night, pillage the car, like people do transfer trucks nowadays. But these guys came up with the idea of hitting the train on the move. Now, that was the innovation on their part. And what they discovered quickly, and I think word spread quickly, is you can often catch the train in the middle of nowhere, right? Because it's tracks out through the wastelands. You can control the situation if you can get the train to stop, and there's no one there to rush to their aid, right? And you can also disappear into the brush and the scrub lands very quickly and hide. And these guys had a $13,000 score on their very first attempt of robbing a moving train, and that is $460,000 when you consider inflation in today's money.
If I thought I could get $460,000 right now, I might go rob this train that runs through our neighborhood.
And so you can imagine.
Sadly, it just carries wood chips.
yeah. It just takes stuff to the meal. I don't want none of that stuff. You could imagine after they pull this off, and they're going to be braggarts to a certain degree, some people more so than others, word's going to spread. Like, this is the new groovy thing to do. So instead of stagecoaches, banks, all these kind of, what they've been holding up individuals on, some desolate road, this became kind of the new trendy thing to do as far as the outlaw goes. It's pretty interesting. And, the train companies quickly figured out later that, hey, we're vulnerable, and it was also the quantities of wealth that were hauled in these box cars as well that was very appealing to outlaws.
Yes. So the best option was an upcoming train scheduled on the Denver-Fort Worth line in Bellevue. Bellevue, Texas at the time was a small watering station sitting south of the Red River near Henrietta. It was about 80 miles away from Fort Worth. It was Saturday, December 11th of 1886, around 11:30 a.m. when the train slowed to take on some water at the tank, which is about a half-mile north of the small village of Bellevue. 3 men were seen riding up to a house on the north side of the track at the tank, tying their horses to a fence, then walking around to sit on what would be considered kind of like the front porch of this house. The 3 men were dressed in, quote, cowboy attire. They walked toward the engine, then suddenly produced revolvers and ordered the engineer and his firemen to hold up their hands. The men were ordered to hand over watches and the money they had on their person. Then the bandits proceeded to rob 2 small train cars. One passenger had $400 on him, but managed to slip it to a young lady to hide. She asked him where, and he sheepishly blushed and said, "In your stocking."
Oh, damn! I thought, okay, good.
Which I thought was kind of funny, considering look how far we've come.
I'm glad he said stocking. I thought she used her flesh case or something.
Her what?
Flesh case. Her flesh wallet. Her vagina, Heather. I thought he was going to. That's why he's blushing. But it was just that simpler time, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, put it in your stocking."
I could honestly probably hide $400 underneath one of my boobs.
Okay.
Right?
I could hide like at least $28 under one of my boobs.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you could probably get $400 under your little belly roll.
Oh, I didn't think about
Got
that.
that little hiding place under there.
Maybe more than that.
Never sees the light of day.
I can get some coins up in there.
You probably, yeah, I think so.
I found a half-eaten sandwich there one day.
That doesn't surprise me.
It's
at all.
not true.
He found a cone of spaghetti there one time. I'm not sure why I was eating spaghetti in a cone. So he only handed over 25 cents to the robbers because they have plenty of time to hide their money because this robbery is, to be honest, Dylan, not going that well.
And that does not surprise me.
There was an army sergeant named Charles Connor and 3 soldiers of the Company F 24th Infantry, which happened to all be African-American soldiers, in a smoking car guarding 2 soldiers that were headed for prison. The other passengers begged them not to intervene for fear the innocent bystanders would suffer in the crossfire. Later, these army enlistees were skewered in the press for their cowardice. The robbery was somewhat successful as they were able to get about $300, which by today's money is maybe a little over $9,000 by today's standards.
Yeah, okay.
So decent little haul, I guess, for a first gig. But they were amateurs. And this, as I mentioned, allowed passengers time to hide their valuables. And they didn't really make out with what they should have, given this, type of train robbery.
Well, the one guy alone hid $400. That would have been bigger than their entire haul.
So a headline in a newspaper said, quote, "The robbers failed to take much of a haul, probably through lack of experience in the business." By now, they've attracted some attention, including the likes of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. However, the authorities believe the robbery was the work of the Brooking Gang from Baylor County, Texas, who had recently broken out of jail. Eventually, a man was arrested by the name of Dick Shepard, but he was later released when he could produce an alibi. Learning from their modest success with an appetite now whet, or did they whet their appetite, Dylan?
Wet.
The men decided the real money was not in robbing passenger trains, but mail and express cars. The men must have had some great excuses for being able to leave their wives and families for extended periods, because again on January 23rd of 1887, they set out for a target closer to home. They selected the tiny town of Gordon in Palo Pinto County, just north of Erath. It served as a primary loading spot for coal on this particular railroad. More than likely, Rube was assisted by his brother Jim, along with Brumley and Thornton. Around 2:28 a.m., just 43 days after the Bellevue robbery, the eastbound Texas and Pacific train slowed as it stopped at the Gordon Depot, then began to pull out for the coal chute, which was about 200 yards down the line. As the train was slowing, the engineer and fireman were taken by surprise when 2 armed men climbed aboard the engine with them. Now, how scary would that be? You're just doing your job, and then all of a sudden, you got a damn 6-shooter in your face.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing your job, some tasks you've done a thousand times, and then all of a sudden you're in a precarious, dangerous situation.
So, of course, the men produced, as I mentioned, 6 shooters, threatening their lives. And by the time the train stopped, the passenger coaches, sleep car, and mail car were astraddle of the trestle, meaning no passengers could climb off the train without hitting a creek bottom below. So, this was a smart move. This was a good maneuvering.
Oh, so that was intentional on their part?
Yes, like getting the train to this certain spot. 2 other men came out of the darkness yelling for the express agent to open the car, but he refused. The robbers opened up the fusillade at the car. One of the bandits shouted, quote, "If the damn dog don't open up, we'll burn the car and roast him alive. We've got to get our money."
Damn it, Jim.
I like that he called him a damn dog. One bullet narrowly missed the agent's head, and with that, he relented and opened the car door. The estimated haul was $10,000, though the express officials eventually downgraded it to about $1,850 later in the press because they
Wow.
didn't want it to be known that they had that kind of money aboard the train.
Yeah, because again, those that first robbery got 13,000. So these guys just got 300 and some $1,000 worth, 340, $50,000 worth or whatever. So that's a lot of money.
Are you calculating that by like today's standards?
Well, the 13,000 to today's standards and inflation was worth $460,000.
Right.
So then the 10, I do not do math. So the 10,000 obviously is going to be what, 400,000, 390,000,
Probably.
a shitload.
I'm going to take your word for it.
So it does, I understand why the train companies didn't want, because now you're making every train a target. And it was smart on their part to kind of go away from the passenger cars, because now you got to deal with crowd control. You got to deal with all these individuals. But now you're going to a freight car, a mail car that has less personnel, easier to control, and also has a lot larger loot hauls coming from it. They're moving payroll around. They're moving, valuable items of various types. So I mean, it's ingenious, really, if you think about it.
Get that booty. The masked robbers were described again as having the appearance of cowboys, wearing white hats and boots with the spurs. The whole club was looking at their boots with the spurs.
Where did they get apple bottom jeans?
I don't know. I don't think Levi was making apple bottom jeans at that time.
You think they got like cowboy butts? Like girls that ride horses have that riding butt?
Do cowboy butts drive you nuts?
According to the bumper sticker.
Yes.
It's true.
Yeah. The mail clerk, who awoke, realizing that a robbery was taking place, had managed to hide many of the registered packages before the robbers got to him. Only 9 packages remained in sight. However, Rube eventually located 34 registered packages aboard this mail car. The sheriff of Dallas County was on the train escorting a prisoner, and he asked some African American soldiers that were also on board if they had any guns. He then asked this group of soldiers if they would join him in resisting the robbers, and only one of the sergeants agreed to follow him. Sheriff Lewis managed to fire 2 shots, but was met with firepower from the masked men. The bandits were able to retreat in the cover of night. The train then proceeded on to Fort Worth, arriving about 2 hours late. So the outlaws escaped to Texas Hill Country, though a few hours after the robbery, they were being pursued by marshals and bloodhounds.
Oh, really?
Coming from Fort Worth.
So they got a daggum posse on their ass.
A young man was stopped about 12 miles from Gordon named James Houston. He was fingered as one of the men who had held up the agent at gunpoint. And Houston was taken to the Dallas County Jail, though he had an alibi of sleeping and working on his father's farm at the time of the robbery. Another man named Robert Settle was also arrested simply because he had $210 on him and seemed suspicious, according to members of this posse.
Well, that's a large sum of money, but maybe he could explain that. Maybe that was the family savings from years.
3 more men, John Oxford, Sam Beal, and Ike Clark, were arrested and taken to Dallas. So this posse has captured 5 of the wrong men.
This posse's not taking any chances, bruh.
No, pretty much everyone they encountered, they just like, you,
Yeah,
you're
so
okay, you come with me.
this posse had an unofficial stop and frisk policy that would make New York City blush. And they're not listening to anybody. Anybody that tries to
Can't
explain
tell 'em
themselves.
nothing.
Can't tell them shit. And they're just taking everybody just in case.
Yeah.
And I think this is what happens when you, because oftentimes the majority of a posse is made up of just regular citizens, right? The sheriff or whoever goes around is like, come with me, let's go get this guy. And it seems like a power going to their head a bit, maybe,
Perhaps. In the meantime, the Burrow brothers and their criminal associates had returned to their routine lives in Erath County. Hoping to avoid detection from authorities, they were cool, kind of like Jimmy Conway after the Lufthansa heist. If you've seen Goodfellas.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were.
Yeah.
They was like, be cool.
He was telling everybody, be cool,
Don't buy a pink Cadillac. Or maybe in their case, you don't want to go buy a new Palomino horse. Like, you just want to be cool.
Don't buy a fur for your wife.
No.
Don't buy a 100-acre farm right now.
No new spurs.
Nothing.
Rube was reportedly a very generous man, though, and would often send letters home to his parents filled with money. In February, Jim purchased 100 acres in Erath from a widow, and the brothers bought a few heads of stock and resumed an honest living for a time. It was sometime in early 1887 that the brothers invited a man named William Brock to work for them on the farm. Brock had known the brothers for about 3 years. He was wholly illiterate, unable to read or write, and later witnesses to the robberies will say he seemed, quote, dumber than the others.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and that could just been his manner of speaking and stuff, too. I work with a guy. The guy's a damn genius. And, when he's not working at the mill anymore, they'll lose just a wealth of knowledge as far as the stuff this guy works on. But he talks in that real slow, extra country drawl. And some people will mistake that for he's not smart. And I'm like, you better watch it. That dude knows everybody around here's job and his job. So
yeah, I have a cousin that spent a lot of time with my grandpa growing up.
Yeah.
And my grandpa had that real
deliberate.
Slow, yeah. And my cousin's speech is slower than molasses. It'll take him damn 30 minutes to tell you a 5-minute story because he just talks so slow. But he's not a dumb guy.
Right.
I think people often mistake that as, he's not that bright or something. They just don't know. Here in the South, we do things at a certain pace.
Well, that's true.
Not
And
going to get in a hurry.
there's also different levels of accent and country which is true for anywhere, right?
Word.
Some people's extra country, right?
Yeah, my cousin Zach is extra.
And that's
country.
fine.
I feel like we need to interview him
Yeah.
just so people can hear the way because it's like listening to my papaw talk, like just slow. And he has a little boy that does the same thing, and it's the cutest. Anyway, Burroughs then got the gang back together along with his ranch hand Brock, and they made plans to rob the train at Gordon again, but high waters on the Brazos River caused them to turn back. They didn't want to use the public ferry to cross the river for risk of being identified, which was smart. So I find it really interesting at this time when you think about there were no bridges and you had to get a ferry to cross a river.
It was either a ferry or an area that is shallow enough to cross on horseback or foot, which is also known as a ford,
Yes.
a river crossing. And yeah,
I know that because I play Oregon Trail. What?
Well, I know you know that. And actually, Canton, town over from us, was originally named Pigeon Ford because there was a river crossing there. Yeah, well, that makes sense because bridges, even to this day, are a very complicated, large piece of infrastructure. You know what I mean?
I guess just, we in our modern world, man, we take so much for granted, right?
Well, just shooting 15 miles somewhere and back is just something these people couldn't imagine. You know what I mean?
No.
To go even a few miles, 5 miles, could be an arduous journey with a pot-filled, worn dirt path, and some daggum wagon wheels if you was lucky to have a wagon and a horse with no kind of shocks or anything like that on it. So I think we often take just the simplest things we do nowadays for granted.
That wagon will be rocking your mama.
And it rocks every wedding reception from here to, the end of time.
White people love wagon wheel.
Man, you want to get a white crowd hyped,
You
put on
want to
wagon
You
wheel.
want to get that bonfire turned up.
And there's something about the Darius Rucker version compared to Old Crow Medicine Show. Some people have their preference there, but the Darius Rucker one, for whatever reason, Hootie connected into white people's soul in a way that not many artists do before or since.
When Dylan saw the Hootie and the Blowfish Monument in Columbia, he had a tear in his eye. And I said, you know what? Just let him cry.
Just let him cry. That was good, babe.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even though that monument made absolutely no sense. But anyway, I've talked about this before.
Okay, so the gang planned to rob another train. Yeah, they didn't want to use their own horses, and Brock didn't even have a horse. Brock knew of 2 horses that belonged to a man named Abel who lived near his father-in-law. And Rube knew of 2 other horses near the Burrow farm belonging to a widow named Greer. So the men set out to steal the horses with success and brought them to hide in some timber near the Burrow farm. But I must tell you, Dylan, these horses were not exactly like winners. One of them was described as a flea-ridden old gray mare.
So, just like the modern day criminal, when you go out and steal a car to go commit a crime in,
They're like stealing the hoopty
yeah,
horses.
they're stealing the horse that might not start when you jump on it.
Yeah.
And if it does, it's not going to exactly be the fastest horse
It's like
out
an
there.
84 Ford Tempo of horses, right?
Oh, that's so funny. That's so funny how it's very much the same thing.
Well, I was thinking about the poor old gray mare, and I was like, she ain't what she used to be.
Yeah, but if you're stealing horses, they're not, easy to find, I'm assuming, or especially unattended horses.
Well, you got to go steal them from a widow? I mean, that's not nice.
That's not nice at all.
So around 9 p.m. on June 2nd of 1887, they set out to Tarrant County. It took a day and a half to ride to Benbrook, camping by the creek. Around 6 p.m. on the evening of June 4th, the men left their horses at camp and walked to the Benbrook station. Rube and Brumley had gone to a bridge over Mary's Creek where they planned to stop the train. Jim and Brock were the unlucky ones. They drew straws, by the way, deciding who would do what. So they were the unlucky ones who drew the straws that tasked them with boarding the engine.
So these guys still don't have exactly the best planning in the group, right?
I mean,
they're kind of
not
making it up as you go.
kind of.
If I'm going to steal a horse to run a train down with and then, escape on, I'm probably going to try to find a horse in fairly good shape, right?
I'm going to get a DeLorean that goes 88 miles per hour.
I'm going to get the biggest, purtiest, fastest horse there is.
I'd probably just end up with a donkey.
Oh, my God.
That's like all I could manage to climb on
You would show up on a burro.
because I'm short. Okay. So it was around 7:45 as the sun was setting that the Texas Pacific train from El Paso pulled into the Benbrook station. As the train was ready to leave the station, Jim and Brock, who had blackened their faces with burnt cork,
Interesting.
I don't know what that is, but I'm assuming it's something that blackens your face.
Well, it sounds like it's a piece of cork that's been burned. I'm going to go out on a limb.
Like a piece of cork, like,
Like cork that would be in a bottle.
okay,
Yeah.
like that corks my wine bottle?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they were wearing some red handkerchiefs over the lower parts of their faces. They jumped aboard the engine with pistols drawn. The train men were ordered to take the train over the bridge at Mary's Creek. Brumley and Rube were waiting and waved the men to stop the train. As the train was being robbed, a mad scramble ensued to hide cash and valuables once again. The men took the express car and got the packages, and in the darkness, the outlaws took off, and once the train had moved on down the line, they got into the river to wash their scent off, and then they put their boots back on and walked to their camp. So they were pretty smart about getting in the creek, taking off their boots, washing up, and then putting their boots back on.
So they left the horses at camp. They camped to where they could approach the train,
Yes.
do their thing, and then sneak off back to camp and then get their horses.
Yeah, but they didn't even bother to try to rob the passengers this time.
Well, I think that
They
was
just
smart.
want the mail and express cars.
Well, they probably figured out quickly that's where the big money's at.
They made off with more than $2,000. After this, the bandits returned to Burrow's farm and once again tried not to rouse suspicions. After 3 train robberies, the public's patience was beginning to wear thin. People were demanding to know when the bandits would be caught. So this puts a lot of pressure on the few members of law enforcement in Texas.
Well, yeah, this stuff they're taking is people in the area's valuables. You know, it could be money transfers from banks, could be your payroll, especially if you work for the railroad or something like that. It could be some valuable that your family sent you from back east.
Well, these people, I mean, a lot of the passengers might be moving,
right?
Like moving into an area to
have
start
all their stuff
better
with them.
life,
Yeah.
so they've got all of their savings on their person.
Yeah, I think it was common. Even we do it today. You liquidate your life into some kind of gold or money and take it with you to start a new life. And then next thing you know, somebody robs you and you've lost everything.
I'm going to liquidate my life and move to Belize.
I liquidate my life. I try to do it every day, even though you frown on that. And I do it with beer.
That's not the same kind of liquidation, Dylan.
It works for me.
You're trying to hydrate your life.
It liquidates my wealth.
Okay.
What can I say?
That's true. On June 18th, the Cornet Whitley gang held up another train east of LaGrange. They clubbed the express agent and split his ears with a pocket knife when he refused to turn over the key to the safe.
Oh, why does that seem really scary?
It seems painful. I imagine that your ear would bleed a lot.
It's like a death of 1,000 cuts or something.
How?
You know?
Wells Fargo and Company were so outraged, they offered up a reward of $9,750 for the capture of the Flatonia robbers.
Whoa, did you say 9,750?
Yeah.
So they're offering the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars in reward. Wow. You know, train companies especially got tired of this very quickly. And I think it's for the reasons you've already outlined. The public outcry, people saying, well, I'm not even going to send my valuables if you can't keep them safe. And they quickly started doing various methods to try to curb this type of robbery on their trains.
Well, and again, there were so many train robberies at this time that it was hard to keep track of, is it the same group of outlaws or multiple groups of outlaws?
Right.
And so you might pin the crime on a completely different group when it's someone else doing it. Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of hard to keep track of what's happening.
One of their first and most common methods to deter robbery were huge safes that were super heavy, no way to be drug out or hauled off by horse. And then they obviously went so far as armed guards, which kind of makes sense. You know, I'm surprised there weren't armed guards before. But this is one of those cases with you never had this problem before. People robbing trains constantly, and they're not going to have that expenditure, that expense, if they don't need the people. But it got so bad, like you said, everywhere they turn, you probably had trains getting hit multiple times before they could even finish their journey, I'm sure.
Well, these guys, they wanted to kind of keep returning to the same train station.
Yeah, that seems not smart to me.
Right? But then again, maybe because if you've hit a train once, the law enforcement, whoever, they're not going to think you're going to hit that train again.
Oh,
right?
Wow. They even went so far as to have entire cars, multiple cars full of armed guards, sometimes soldiers, and their horses. So they can literally either fight the bandits off or give chase instantly to catch that very group that attacked. So it's pretty crazy.
Well, one of the reasons why Wells Fargo and Company offered up such a huge reward is the outbreak of train robberies in Texas was becoming a big concern. It led to increased alertness and ongoing efforts to nab the criminals. However, the Burrow gang was oblivious to the heat they had brought to Texas. But by September, they were back at the Benbrook station hoping to rob the train once again. On September 20th, the engineer was pulling out of the Benbrook station headed for Fort Worth when 2 men wearing handkerchiefs hopped into the cab with pistols. And by the way, this was the same engineer that they had robbed before.
Yeah, they won't expect us to do it for the 30th time, I swear.
And when he asked them where to stop, the outlaws ordered him to go to the same place along Mary's Creek where he'd gone before. They told him, just go to the same place you went last time.
So this is a confirmation for the engineer and the company that this is definitely the same group of people, right?
Now, there were even some jokes made because later he said, you're the same gang who robbed me before. And they're like, nope, we're not. And he's like, well, you told me to go to the same spot. And they just kind of laugh at this engineer. It's like become a joke.
Gosh, you know that one guy was maybe the literate one was considered the dumber one of the group. But I gotta say, I don't think there's any rocket scientists in this group at all.
I mean, probably not, Dylan. Okay? They're just cowboys. They're just working men, just doing the best they can. Okay?
You know, it's funny how much we romanticize, especially this entire period of time, but even things like what these guys are doing, this type of crime. Because, you know, in the movies and the stories and stuff, it's always so suave and this really like kind of Rube Goldberg, you know, contraption of a plan that has to be perfect and all these moving parts and everything's pulled off perfectly, when in reality it was like these lumbering idiots who just run up to a train that's barely moving and jump on and point a gun at the conductor, you know, or the engineer rather.
Right. When shots rang out as the 3 other robbers boarded the train, passengers start freaking out, trying to hide their valuables. The outlaws first raided the express car, then unloaded the registered packages from the mail car. Then the 5 outlaws managed to skirt away into the timber surrounding the creek and disappear once again. When the train arrived in Fort Worth, the sheriff organized a posse again, and along with bloodhounds made their way to Benbrook. Burrow's gang got a good head start, and the dogs lost their scent fairly quickly. Because, again, these guys are jumping in the water in the creek. They're washing off.
Maybe even travel up creek.
Leaving horses
a couple hundred feet
behind. So it's pretty hard to trace them.
Well, they at least know how to get away, I guess.
In November, the brothers traveled to Alabama to visit with their family. The 4 successful robberies under their belts caused the brothers to breathe easily. They're in a familiar place, surrounded by friends and family, and they don't have to look over their shoulders there. However, law enforcement didn't have a clue that the Burrows were even in the bandit business yet. They had no idea that this was like a new train robbing gang on the scene.
Oh, okay.
They're still pinning the crimes on other people. There's multiple gangs in Texas, but they have no idea who the Burrow brothers are.
Well, I guess that would work in the gang's favor.
So just anonymity all around at this point. Even though they are, I guess, being noticed by the Pinkerton Detective Agency, but they still don't have a name to tie to the gang.
But they're thinking it's not, maybe not these other groups for various reasons. Yeah, the
Pinkerton detectives thinks that it's not these other groups, that this is some new gang, or maybe members of other gangs have formed a new group or something like that. So it was in December that a robbery at the St. Louis, Arkansas and Texas Railroad Express train at Genoa would finally put Rube Burrow on the wanted list. While visiting with relatives, Rube sent Brock a letter asking him to meet up in Texarkana. Brumley was in Louisiana, therefore he was unavailable to join them. The men took rooms at the Cosmopolitan Hotel in St. Louis, Arkansas, near the Texas train depot, the railroad known as the Cotton Belt. Brock and Jim were afraid to pull off a robbery here because they didn't know the area. Rube, as the leader, took charge of the situation, convincing them it would be no more difficult than their earlier robberies. With only 3 pistols among them, they felt they needed more weapons, so they hopped a train to Tyler, Texas. They didn't find what they needed, so they rode on to Corsicana and purchased 2 Winchester rifles and 40 pounds of cartridges. By December 7th, they were back in Texarkana, ready to go to Garland City, where they would rob a train. However, they had an unsuccessful attempt as men were working on the line, so they headed back to Genoa Station to hold up the Cotton Belt train, but it rolled on by without stopping. So this plan's just not working out for these guys.
Big surprise.
They're staying in town a lot longer than they meant to, not having any luck. Things are not going great. Finally, on December 9th at 1887, it was around 6 p.m. The weather was rainy, so the 3 outlaws wore dark rubber slicker raincoats. As the eastbound train left Genoa Station, Brock and Jim climbed aboard the engine. Rube was waiting in the cut. A porter, realizing there was a robbery in progress, managed to leap from the train and run several miles back to Genoa for help. The express car manager refused to open the door at first, so the men pumped 15 rounds into it. Finally, he unlocked the door. They scoured the express car, then moved on to the mail car. With about $2,800 in currency and $300 in silver, the bandits retreated into the woods. They built a fire to burn the express envelopes. Afterwards, they went on foot to Texarkana to buy whiskey and celebrate, and Jim was carrying the loot. The train happened to be carrying an Illinois lottery payoff, which
Ooh.
helped them with a rather big score. After this robbery, the Pinkertons were hot on their trail, and the Burrow brothers became a name. Before this, lawmen didn't know who they were because they had no reputation for being criminals. But here's where things heat up. So the men get into a skirmish with a sheriff outside of Texarkana, Texas. Having gotten the news of another train robbery, this sheriff and a posse set out to find the robbers. Burrow's gang had walked along the train tracks, getting within 3 to 4 miles of Texarkana when they ran into 2 men from the posse. The lawmen saw the 3 men and ordered them to halt. The outlaws opened fire. So the sheriff and this other lawman emptied their pistols at the 3 members of the Burrows gang, but they managed to retreat into the woods. The lawmen went back to Texarkana for more ammunition, having used all of their bullets in the gunfight.
Well, and that's how ammunition works. Let's be honest.
They're ill prepared for a gunfight, right?
Yeah, I know. They needed like 40 pounds of ammunition. That seems like a lot, but maybe it's not.
So the Burrows, this is where things get exciting, Dylan. The Burrows discarded their rain slickers and headed back home to Lamar County, Alabama. Brock went on to Texas. The Outlaws had discarded those raincoats near the railroad tracks. Using the coats, somehow, Pinkerton agents were able to track down Brock after finding out that he had purchased the raincoat at a store in Alexander, Texas.
Oh, my God.
So these Pinkertons found this raincoat, figured out where the manufacturer had sold raincoats in Texas.
Wow.
And they went to every general store that sold these jackets in Texas until they found a clerk that confirmed this guy, William Brock, had bought the coat along with another man. Brock had recently been to Texarkana along with this other man that had purchased a coat, and the clerk's like, yeah, I think that other guy was going on to Alabama.
Wow. So the Pinkertons, that's why they were so famous back then, were actually using some pretty smart and advanced investigative techniques, right? I mean, they do that to this day.
Clerk was in Erath County, where the Burrows brothers lived, along with William Brock. It was pretty easy for these detectives to figure out who this other guy was with Brock, that he was a Burrow, and that he had gone on to Alabama. So people were like, oh yeah, well the Burrows brothers, they went on to Alabama. That's where they've got family. So yeah, pretty interesting how they were able to piece this together.
So now they're on the radar.
Yes.
Okay.
And so after this heist, Brock was apprehended on December 31st of 1887. He was identified by the train engineer, and also he was followed to Waco, where Pinkerton detectives had witnessed him going on a shopping spree with his wife.
Uh-oh.
Before he was apprehended. So once arrested, Brock spilled the beans, admitting that he had helped rob the trains and ended up giving up the Burrow brothers.
And there you go. That's why you do not lavishly spend. You got to sit on that money. Maybe find out some type of way of laundering it, buy a small business or something like that. And there you go. And now he's just coughed up the whole gang and the whole plan, and everything's exposed.
So now they have the name Reuben Burrows. A detective named John McGinn with the Pinkerton Agency showed up in Lamar County looking for Rube, but somehow ended up at the wrong house. It is believed that members of the community directed him to the wrong house because people liked Rube. They didn't want him to get in trouble. This gave Jim time to warn his big brother. So the Burrows were able to slip away to Birmingham, where they caught a train on the Louisville-Nashville line. There was a conductor who recognized them. So this is when things
Oh my gosh.
turned bad. From some recent wanted posters. The conductor wired ahead to a police station in Montgomery, where the brothers had decided to get off the train, and set up a trap for police to meet the train when it stopped. The police devised a plan with hopes of luring the men to jail by posing as railroad workers and offering the Burrows lodgings for the evening.
Okay.
I mean, it's kind of a good plan.
Yeah, I guess.
Hey, you guys need a place to stay?
Yeah.
Right?
I'm just a lowly railroad worker, but if you want to bunk with me, you can.
I'm just a blue-collar guy. I have a twin bed you can share. Okay. So Rube realized it was all a ruse and got into a gunfight with law enforcement. And this is when Rube shot an officer, which allowed him to escape. He stole a horse and headed south, where he was able to lose the posse pursuing him. His brother Jim, not as successful, Dylan. Jim was captured and sentenced to serve time in Little Rock Prison. For a brief time, Rube returned to Lamar County, and that's when he learned his brother has been arrested and jailed.
So I thought, I just knew you were going to say one of them stole a 3-legged horse that had been dead for 3 days.
It's likely.
Yeah.
That's actually what they stole back in Texas when they did that third train heist.
Guy's just on top of the horse, just whipping it and looking behind him, but he's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It's because it's dead.
And it's actually just 2 guys in a horse costume.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we were in a horse costume, who would be the ass?
Me, baby.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah.
You'd fill that costume out with that dump truck.
Yeah. I was just trying to bill up on your ass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be the brains of the
It'd
operation.
be so sweaty in that horse costume.
And I would always say nay. That'd be my answer to everything.
I'd poke you. Every time I poked you, you'd be like, nay.
Yeah.
Nay.
Ooh, make me slobber.
Yeah. Okay.
Damn.
Okay, enough.
What?
Let's move along.
I mean, it happens. When you poke me in the butt, I slobber, right? We know this.
I don't know, because you won't let me poke you in the butt.
That's
a story for another time.
okay.
Jim sent letters home to his family stating he didn't think he would serve much time for the crimes and had a good chance of beating the charges against him. Unfortunately, fate had different plans. Jim Burrows died of tuberculosis in prison on October 5th of 1888.
He didn't call it that Doc Holiday.
Got the consumption.
The consumption.
In March of 1888, Rube met up with a guy, Leonard Brock, also known as Lewis Waldrop. I love how they got these aliases, and it's like never a cool name.
My name is Jim Masterson. Yeah, of the Boston Mastersons.
I mean, if your real name's Lewis, you're going to pick Leonard as your alias?
Well,
or if you're Leonard, you're picking Lewis as your, I don't know.
Well, you don't want to not answer to your fake name, so there might have been a little bit of reasoning in that, having both starting with L. So if I'm Dylan and my alias would be
Doug.
Daniel, right?
No, I'm going to call you Doug because that's your enemy at work.
I don't know that I want to be Doug. No offense to any Dougs out there.
I'm going to call you Doug just because you don't like a Doug.
Oh, my God. He's the worst Doug, though. And I don't think it's just because his name's Doug. I think if his name was Jeremy, he would be a shitty Jeremy. I just think this guy wouldn't.
That's why I'm going to call you Doug.
This guy wouldn't win.
So anyway, this guy, Leonard Brock, Lewis Waldrop, whatever you want to call him, he worked alongside Rube Burrows as a ranch hand in Texas some years before. Rube was convinced that Brock should take up the name Joe Jackson, a legendary Texas train robber, in hopes it would strike fear, as folks would believe Rube Burrows had teamed up with an even more dangerous and notorious outlaw. This reminds me of like the Dread Pirate Roberts story.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to start calling you like Ted Bundy so people are like, oh, and it strikes fear in their heart.
Man, when you say Dread Pirate Roberts, that reminds me of the damn teenager who was running the modern day Silk Road and making like $4 million a day.
Yeah.
Wow.
So all you got to do is say you're Joe Jackson, the train robber.
You know, I could see a flip side to that coin that would be rather negative. Because if this Joe Jackson, if he is notorious and a badass and kicking ass left and right, he might have people looking for him or people looking to make amends or some type of vengeance, right? And but you're not really Joe Jackson. But when they catch up to you, they're like, "Oh no, you're Joe Jackson." You see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying, Dylan.
Okay, you're dying for the sins of the real Joe Jackson.
Yeah, but when you say the name Joe Jackson, people be shaking and quaking in the boots.
Oh,
Right?
okay.
Them spurs be rattling with fear.
It's Joe Jackson.
The men set out from Alabama and traveled through Mississippi, then back east before sheltering at a logging camp in Baldwin County, Alabama. But before they departed for Mississippi, they robbed a train in Duck Hill. Rube shot and killed a passenger. This was Rube's first murder. Now, if you remember, he shot at a sheriff.
Wounded him.
But this is his first actual murder. So after committing the murder, Rube became more reckless. After this, he went back home to Lamar County with money in his pocket, planning to break his brother Jim out of prison. In August, he and Brock headed to Little Rock because their plans were to move Jim. The prison had plans to move Jim to Texarkana, to a jail facility there. So they were like, okay, we're going to break him out before they move him to Texas. And Jim had also written a letter home asking for money, hoping to procure a lawyer. His trial would be taking place in March. But before Rube could bust him out, Jim succumbed to sickness that fall. Died.
Okay. Well, he didn't move fast enough.
Well, you know, Dylan, they're on horses, and I'm guessing trying to break somebody out of prison, it takes a little bit more planning. Right?
Than just being like, hey, there's a train, let's go rob it.
Robbing a train.
Yeah.
Okay? You got to have a little strategery.
Because it turns out there's other men with guns there at the prison or jail that don't want you to break someone out.
Well, exactly.
Okay.
You got to use your brain, Dylan. Okay? Having failed at the rescue attempt, Rube and Brock made their way back to Lamar County. By now, the train murder had made national headlines, but instead of pinning the crime on Rube, the Pinkertons thought the description matched that of another man, Eugene Bunch. So they pursued him, leaving Rube Burrows once again a free man. I mean, this guy just keeps getting the luck of the draw.
Well, I think luck more than any skill set has gotten them to this point. I mean, they should have been caught long ago, in my opinion.
Through the spring of 1889, Burrows and Brock were able to hide out in Lamar County. Family and friends hid the men, keeping them flush with supplies, and detouring any detectives or bounty hunters who might be in the area, giving them false information, that kind of thing. Then things took a turn for the worse in July when Rube murdered a well-known and respected postmaster, a man named Moses Graves. Graves refused to hand over a package to Rube, saying it seemed suspicious. Now get this.
The package or the fact that he wanted him to hand it over?
Well, I guess Rube goes to collect the package, and this guy, Moses Graves, is like, I'm not going to give this to you. It seems suspicious.
I've been accused so many times of having a suspicious package. Yes.
It's a small delivery, I'll say that.
Well, it is, but you know what?
It's a small, unassuming delivery.
Wow. Wrapped in just plain paper with no return address. It's quality over quantity, and that's what I live my life by.
Again, it's a suspicious package.
It's the law of non-abundance.
Well, it's non-abundant, I'll tell you that.
Ah.
Okay, so get this, Dylan.
Very angry, though.
Will you shut up talking about your package and listen to my story, damn it? The package, the suspicious package,
Okay.
contained a wig and a mustache.
Oh, no way.
Yes.
No, it can't be real.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh.
It did. It was a disguise. It had a wig and a mustache.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, that's great, man. I love these guys. If they weren't murdering people, honestly, I would be like their fan club of fanboying.
After this, 3 of Burrows' relatives were jailed on charges of harboring fugitives. The Burrows didn't talk and still managed to hide Rube and his accomplice until September, even though they've jailed his brother-in-law. I think one of his sisters was put in jail.
So they've had enough.
Well, they're still hiding him out.
Right, but they're starting to dial up the pressure, pressuring family, friends, anyone that helps them.
Well, locals who were once supportive of Rube began to turn on him after he murdered this postmaster.
That's what I was going to say. When the murdering of citizens, or just regular people doing their job, that is the type of thing that can turn public sentiment against you. As long as you're robbing from the faceless company or a corporation, people will tend to be like, yeah, it's Robin Hood. But once the murdering starts, people get outraged very quickly.
And they thought if he would shoot someone like Graves, who was well-liked, well-respected, then, like, hey, I wouldn't stand a chance against a desperate outlaw if he were to turn on me.
Right, because I'm an asshole that my neighbors hate.
See, exactly, Dylan. You don't stand a chance. Later in the year, Rube robbed 2 more trains. Burrows, Brock, and a cousin named Rube Smith, apparently Rube is a really popular name in this family, they set out southwest and robbed the Mobile and Ohio Railroad at Buckatuna, Mississippi.
Buckatuna.
I hope I'm saying that right. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm not.
What?
Where they took several $1,000s.
As the story continues, I'm starting to suspect the fact that the other definition of Rube being short for Rube and the other one being short of, or being a name for a country bumpkin or kind of an idiot may very well have come from this family and their poor planning skills. They needed like an organizer.
How do they have poor planning? They're getting away with thousands of dollars.
Yeah, but it seems like they keep ending up in hot water because of the plans seem to be poorly thought out to a degree. You don't agree?
I don't know. I think they're doing okay.
I guess they always get away for the most part. So
I'm going to give them a B-. I
guess things are going to happen, right?
Rating bank robbers, I'm giving them a B-. I'll make a TikTok where I'm like, I'm going to rate bank robbers, train robbers.
Okay.
They returned home once again, and by November, Lamar County was swarming with law enforcement and bounty hunters. Feeling pressure and heat all around, Alan Burrows helped his son and Brock purchase an ox cart. They traveled to Flowmation, arriving on December 14th. His cousin Rube Smith and a guy named James McClung were caught in Amory, Mississippi, trying to rob a train. They were taken to Aberdeen, Mississippi. So now their accomplices starting to get busted. The pressure's on.
Well, they know where they are. They know where they live. They know where their base of operation.
Glenn Fry's doing a solo career. The heat is on the streets. Ah! Yeah, you like that?
Mm-hmm. Da na 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 da na na na.
We have that on vinyl. For the next couple of months, Pinkerton detectives searched South Alabama, combing communities, searching for Burrow and Brock, still believing that they were in Alabama. I called it Flowmation. It's actually like Flomaton.
Oh. Well, who knew? Who expected that? Sounds like a damn transformer.
Yeah, so they're in Flomaton, which is still in Alabama. But the Pinkertons are pretty sure they're still here, looking all over for the guys. Eventually, Burrow was chased by Pinkerton agents through the Raccoon Mountains in Blount County, Alabama, along with Ben Thornton. Newspapers reported a posse of 40 men called up to the Outlaws near Brooksville. The Outlaws fired upon the men, killing both the sheriff and a man named Penwood Ward.
Penwood Ward?
There's some great names. Over 100 shots were exchanged between Rube and the posse. Several others in the posse were wounded. The Outlaws once again were able to escape. But this time, the negative press surrounding Rube caused the people of Alabama to further turn on the Burrows.
Can you imagine the citizens in the posse like, I ain't signed up for this, Sheriff. This is a bunch of bullshit.
With this murder, he was no longer hailed as a local bandit folk hero type. Now people viewed him more as a dangerous psycho.
Well, yeah, now you've killed the local sheriff, who everyone counts on, knows.
The postmaster.
The postmaster, just a regular, respected citizen doing his job. Injured other citizens possibly in the posse there, and who knows it, who else. So, yeah, I could see it. I could see public sentiment certainly starting to swing around on him.
They're all turning on him.
Well, I mean, it's just creating so much chaos, you know?
It is, and it's scary, and you don't want to get caught up in some crossfire.
Man, I must say the Pinkertons are relentless. Once they get on your scent, they are well financed. They actually are rather skillful in their investigative techniques that they employ and things like that. And it always seemed like the guys who were Pinkertons if I'm not mistaken, Pinkertons were based in New York. I could be wrong on that. But based in
Chicago?
some big city.
Yeah, I can't remember.
They were tough, fairly tough, cunning hombres, right? And they just never, once they got on your trail, that they were the end of many a group of outlaws and single outlaws.
They would be like, the jig is up, your ass is mine.
Yeah, just tracking them down, staying on their trail, finding out information, investigative techniques they're employing.
It's like, I just imagine it's like Principal Rooney when he's on Ferris Bueller's trail. He's just not going to give up.
Right, but they actually catch them. Rooney was always one step behind, wasn't he?
No, he got to their house, remember?
Oh, yeah, he did.
But then the sister, beat the shit out of him and threatened him. I'm just saying, Edward Rooney was all up on their trail. And that's like a Pinkerton agent. They're all there.
I'm not letting you watch 80s movies
Every
anymore.
move, right? From a baseball game to the pizza place, he's there.
Yeah, so Rube's in trouble, right? I think that's safe to say.
He's wanted, dead or alive. Okay,
if you invoke the spirit of Bon Jovi one more time in this story, I'm going to throw hands.
Are you saying I'm living on a prayer right now?
Jesus Christ. Yes, I would. I'm going to allow you that one because it fits so perfectly.
Hey, you know what?
That's it.
Bad jokes, bad medicine. My humor is slippery when wet.
Just shut. 80s movies, Bon Jovi.
This is how my brain works. You're always saying that's how your brain. This is how my brain works, Dylan.
Okay, I respect it.
Okay, so in February, a ferryman.
It's a ferry person. The
who-
guy who drives the fucking boat.
who worked at a crossing near Milton, Florida, spoke with a detective and told him that Rube Burrows and Leonard Brock, had separated after the gunfight in Flomaton. Someone's going to correct me. Burrows had gone to Santa Rosa County in Florida, where he was working at a logging camp just across the Yellow River. Burrows was working on his grain hauling route when he sensed an ambush was awaiting him. His little spidey senses started tingling, Dylan.
How is Flomaton spelled?
How it sounds.
FLOMEATON. Okay.
I think. Yeah.
Okay.
I keep wanting to call it Flomation, but it's Flomaton.
I want it to be
or
Flomation.
Flomaton. I don't know.
Come on down to Flomation, home of the animated man.
Okay, so Rube, his little spidey senses are tingling. He's hauling some grain. He's like, there's an ambush ahead. Now, how he knew this, I don't know. But he flees into the woods, once again, evading detectives.
Man, they can't get their hands on him.
He's just like the luckiest guy in the world. But Brock, not so lucky. He was discovered at Fernbake Station in Lamar County in Alabama as he attempted to travel to Florida to find Rube. Like, why would you go back to the place where all the detectives and bounty hunters are like hanging out looking for you?
They'll never expect it. They'll never expect me to turn myself in.
He was arrested and taken to Memphis, Tennessee for trial. By September 1st of 1890, detectives received word that Rube Burrows robbed the L&N train at Pollard, apparently all by himself. They were able to track him back to Santa Rosa County to a house where he'd formerly rented a room from a family while he was working at that logging camp. Yet once again, his allies were able to get word to Rube that he had been discovered, and he was able to flee the area for the backwoods. He's got friends in low places. It was outside Demopolis that Rube was recognized by some random guy. Now, the guy is like, hey, man, why don't you come to a dinner party that my friend is having?
Well, sure, stranger. Thank you.
Yeah, so Rube goes to this dinner, and they hold him at gunpoint until detectives arrive.
Nice.
Bound to a horse, the outlaw was taken to Linden in Marengo County. It was on the morning of October 9th, 1890, and Rube had only been in custody for a few hours when he tried to escape. He asked police to untie his hands so he could eat, but instead pulled a hidden pistol on them. Rube was able to make his way outside the jail, but immediately got into a shootout with a merchant named Jefferson Davis Carter. Burrows managed to hit Carter in the stomach before completely emptying his pistol. But Carter shot Burrows in the chest as he turned to run, and it killed him instantly.
Oh.
The outlaw, Rube Burrows, lay dead in the street. His body was placed on a train to be shipped back to Lamar County, Alabama, but there were multiple stops along the way, so the body of this famous train robber could be put on display.
I thought you was going to say consequently the train was robbed by other group of bandits and his body was stolen.
Okay, so get this. Thrill seekers in Birmingham showed up by the thousands to view Rube in his casket.
And that's no surprise.
Propped him up right there by the train.
Well, you got a famous, in that area especially, a famous outlaw, and they finally got him.
These visitors reportedly snatched souvenirs, including buttons from his coat, hair from his head, and someone even stole Rube's boots.
Okay.
His weapons were taken to Memphis, Tennessee, and put on display. This also drew large crowds. When his body finally reached home, his father Allen collected the remains and buried him in the Fellowship Cemetery. Only a month later, Leonard Brock received a life sentence in prison. Instead of taking the punishment, he leapt from his death atop the Brock Penitentiary in Jackson, Tennessee.
So, yeah, it was common for them to display their weapons, especially. Many famous outlaws' weapons could be found to this day in museums.
Years later, in 1893, the legend of the Burrow brothers would once again sensationalize newspaper headlines. The bodies of convicts buried near the prison in Little Rock were to be exhumed and moved to a new cemetery. According to newspaper accounts at that time, Jim Burrow's coffin was empty when opened. A story in the Milwaukee Journal reported, quote, "The discovery of the empty coffin has created sensation, and the rumors are in circulation that the bandit may have escaped."
Ooh, adding to the infamy of the Burrow.
The Burrows brothers.
The Burrows.
Yeah. So this has been the story of Reuben Burrows.
I thought it was interesting. You know, we've talked about some bandits in the past, and it was. I do wonder why these guys. Maybe you haven't heard more about them because they had a pretty good run there, right?
I hear they're big in Alabama.
They were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you start killing citizens. You got to have a strict no murdering the people you're robbing policy as a bandit with morals, a moral compass. And, once you break that rule, you lose the public sentiment, and then they start snitching you out, and they won't help you. And when they see you, they're going to turn you in, bud.
So I have a question. You think that train robbing, like what Burrows was doing, that it was like a gateway crime for Rube to go on and commit murder? Like he goes from just robbing trains to I'm going to shoot at the sheriff, shoot at these posse members, maybe wound one of them, to straight up, I'm just going to fucking kill people.
I think it's inevitable if you keep robbing trains, you're going to end up in a situation where gunfire will be exchanged, which is obviously going to lead to someone getting killed or wounded badly.
Bang, bang.
And I don't know if he intentionally was like, fuck this, I'm going to shoot him. But yeah, like I said, if you keep it up, something's going to happen. It's inevitable. Somebody's going to try to be a hero. One of the passengers, one of the people that work for the railroad, conductors, engineers, and let alone with going back and to the same people.
Well, there were multiple times when there would be a sheriff on the train.
Right, or soldiers.
Soldiers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the West.
He narrowly escaped being caught so many times.
It's the West. Everybody's got a damn gun. You know what I mean? Especially messing around in Alabama and Texas, bud. They still got them damn guns down there.
It's true.
They don't play around unless you're law enforcement and there's someone inside shooting a school shooting kids. And then you wait outside for over an hour for other people.
And then you're going to just be rootin' tootin' outside.
That story, I can't even take it.
I know, right?
I think it was intentional. I think they wanted the body count to be higher. Sorry, I don't know what else explains
well,
it.
we're not talking about that right now. We're
Anywho,
talking about train robbers and outlaws.
Yeah, you're right. But yeah, I think it was inevitable to, for the crime to keep getting worse,
I feel like being a train robber would be fucking cool.
It seemed almost comical at first, like people were just like, oh, shucks, they got us, and we'd go on to their destination, but it just kept getting more and more. And it seems like they stole enough, they could have just went and chilled, bought some property, maybe bought a business, and they would have all been fine. They had some pretty good scores, hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's money, and they could have lived fine off of what they had already done, but they just kept doing it. And I'm sure it's more...
It's called greed, Dylan.
Yeah, and it's about the rush, I'm sure,
the
too.
Adrenaline.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sure.
All right, thank you for that, Heather. I really enjoyed that story. And we are getting primed for our very, very interesting story coming up.
Our venture into the state of West Virginia, we will be covering cases from West Virginia all month long, the whole month of July.
I can't wait.
I'm excited.
They have great stories up through there.
West Virginia is a cool place. It's so pretty.
Every state does.
I want to take you to West Virginia, Dylan.
I want to take you in West Virginia.
You need to go visit.
Hey.
I think you would love it. It's so pretty there.
I can imagine. I've seen pictures, and it seems very beautiful. It seems like the area we live in here in the Blue Ridge Mountains, but even pretty different in some really cool ways.
It's beautiful in the fall.
A little steeper,
we really
maybe.
should visit.
Yeah, and okay, let's do it.
Okay.
Hey.
I guess you're ready to wrap things up then.
Well,
if
yeah.
you have a case suggestion, something you would like to hear, email us mountainmurderspodcast@gmail.com.
And if you would like to get more content, extra content, and the ad-free experience, you can join us at patreon.com/mountainmurderspodcast, where all our wonderful patrons get the full experience.
I have to apologize if this episode seemed a little janky. I'm sweating my ass off. We're in a room right now with no fan, no air conditioning. Like the windows, the doors are closed because we can't have any type of air running. It picks up in the mics.
No, I have enough hot air for everybody.
It's hot as hell in here.
It
so
is.
I'm having a hard time concentrating.
I think you did
I'm
fine.
Burning up.
I think you did fine, and we're going to get everything back on track. And until next week, until the midweek,
I'm sweating bullets.
We will catch you again, and we hope everyone stays safe.
Are you going to catch them on the cool side of the pillow? Because I'm going to have to go lay on a cool side of a pillow right now.
If they're on my cool side of a pillow, that'd be kind of weird.
Like having a hot flash.
Freak me out.
Whew, okay.
I'm like, oh my God, there's listeners under here.
Well, hope you guys have a great week and try to stay cool. Enjoy the few remaining days of June.
And if you rob trains, don't shoot people. The people are going to turn on you.
Yeah, don't do that. Bye.